Usually, protagonists in a story are supposed to be a good, heroic individual. But there are some that aren't your typical Boy Scout. There are 7 anime protagonists that I believe represent the 7 deadly sins. Some more obvious than not, and if you don't agree with my takes, go fuck yourself. Let's start with pride.
Love's gonna get you killed, but pride's gonna be the death of you and you.
Who better than to portray the sin of pride than the self-proclaimed god of the new world himself, Light Yagami? This guy's one of the most egotistical protagonists of all time, and I wouldn't even blame him for having such a big ego. I mean, he got it all. He got the looks, he got the brains, he got the sociopathic tendency. I mean, it's like looking in a mirror. He's literally me. Light's primary goal at the beginning of the series was to eliminate injustice in the world by killing off criminals. And the only reason he did this was not because of the goodness of his own heart, but because he was bored. In his life before finding the death belt, there was nothing left for him to achieve since he was already popular and was pretty much guaranteed to have a successful future. So he wanted more than that. He wanted to achieve more to feed his ego. By not only being the judge, but also the executioner. Of course, Light would have his own head up his ass. He saw himself as this Christ-like figure who was above everyone else, and was someone that he deemed infallible. And when confronted by L, a person for the first time in his life who could manage to match his estimable intelligence, Light's pride would blind himself even more. L was the only obstacle standing between him and his achievement of God of the New World, and he would go through extreme measures to win and also prove himself that he is better than L. And spoiler alert, but once L died, Light's hubris expanded even more. He would get cocky and make even more reckless decisions and become overconfident, not realizing that his pride would ultimately lead to his downfall.
Now let me say I'm the biggest hater. I hate the way that you walk, the way that you talk. I hate the way that you dress. I hate the way...
Next up on our list of sinners, representing wrath, is Eren Yeager, a man who committed literal fucking genocide. Eren's hatefulness for the world he lived in started when he witnessed his mom being eaten by a titan. That day, he was reminded that he was trapped within the walls, with no freedom, and trapped within a cage. From that day on, he harbored an intense hatred for titans, who he blamed for trapping him within the walls, and would stop at nothing to fight against the titans, and achieve his freedom. So you can imagine how Eren felt when he finally escaped the walls, only to find out the cage he was living in was bigger than he realized. The Marley Empire was responsible for the suffering he and his people faced for the past many years, and Eren was fucking pissed, man. His vengefulness and resentment grew even more and manifested into the ultimate expression of his wrath, the Rumbling, in which Eren would wipe out 80% of the world's population. So yeah, I guess you could say he was a little angry, just like how the Attack on Titan fandom was towards the ending.
Today I don't feel like doing anything.
Although not a genocidal maniac or a sociopath, Spike Spiegel still is a sinner, representing our sin of sloth. Spike prefers to spend his time relaxing while watching TV and smoking a cigarette when he isn't collecting bounties. He doesn't like indulging in complicated tasks, so instead he likes to take things simple. So basically, he's about lazy as the writers of the Cowboy Bebop Netflix show. Still, despite his laziness, Spike is resourceful. But what mainly correlates him to the sin of sloth is his apathetic nature, and you can clearly see this through one of Spike's iconic lines in the show.
These wheels aren't retracting!
Yep, and the number 2 nozzle won't work either.
What? Are you for real? We can't live
Oh, well.
without them! I knew I should've
Whatever
come up here.
happens,
I'm only 18.
happens.
Also, side note, Steve Blum is the fucking GOAT. But, anyways, Spike just doesn't really give a shit about his life. He's a man that lives day to day, minute by minute, and is someone that doesn't allow himself to be invested in anything or anyone. He views life as nothing but a dream, and he's careless. He doesn't care what happens to him. He doesn't want to care in general. Whether he lives or dies, it doesn't matter to him, as he believes that he truly died a long time ago. Now, unlike Spike's indifference towards life and others, Shinji Ikari can be seen as the complete opposite of Spike, as he represents the sin of envy. Now, I'm not a licensed psychologist, but by looking at Shinji, I would say he has a case of histrionic personality disorder. And I know this thanks to the AP psych class that I took when I was in high school. You know, not to brag or anything, but HPD basically means Shinji wants to be the center of attention and does this through showing an outrage of various emotions. And he would be extremely jealous whenever someone else would take his spotlight, whether it be Asuka or Rei. I mean, it makes sense. Anyways, it makes sense as to why Shinji craves attention so much, since he was abandoned by his father after all, and his father barely looks at him, let alone appreciates his achievements, and instead, you know, Gendo glazes the fuck out of Rei, which Shinji is obviously envious of. At the end of the day, all Shinji really wants is someone to care about him, and only him.
Every time I close my eyes, wake up feeling so hard.
The next character is 100%, in all honesty, the best representation of what lust can do to a man, and that is Denji. I mean, do I even need to explain this? This is a guy who is willing to crawl on his knees and bark like a dog for a woman's attention. In most of Chainsaw Man, all Denji's thinking about is having sex. His hormones are all over the place, man. And his lust isn't just all about that either. Denji is the antithesis of your typical shonen protagonist, in which he isn't subjugated to one big heroic certain motivation or desire, but instead is a protagonist who desires more. At first, Denji's desires are focused on having a normal life, like having enough food to eat and, you know, having a comfortable place to sleep, which is understandable since these are the needs of someone who has lived a life of extreme poverty and neglect. But then he finally achieves like everything that he wanted, not even like a chapter into the story, and after securing food and shelter, he quickly becomes fixated on more immediate sexual pleasures. And you could see that every time Denji reaches a small goal, he ends up feeling empty and wanting more. It's like he's on a hedonic treadmill. This cycle of desire and dissatisfaction shows how lust can lead to a never-ending pursuit of fulfillment that is always just out of reach. Denji's journey is a stark portrayal of how unchecked lust can dominate a person's life, leading them to make irrational decisions and often leading them to be easily manipulated. And you can see this with characters like Makima and others who use Denji's lust for them to their advantage. Ultimately, Denji's ever-escalating desires lead him to never find true satisfaction. Basically, he's just down bad.
Whopper, 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 Junior, Double, Triple, Whopper, Flame.
Now, for Gluttony, I could put a character that represents it in the traditional sense here, where someone like Goku or even Luffy could represent Gluttony because they really love eating, you know, a shit ton of food and love the idea of food. But instead, I'm gonna go with another route of Gluttony, where it's not the overindulgence of like food, but instead something else. And the character I chose that best represents the sin of Gluttony is David Martinez from Cyberpunk Edgerunner. Throughout the anime, we see David augmenting himself with cybernetics more and more, and this over-augmentation can cause cyberpsychosis, which is when a person has too much augmentation to where their body can't handle it, and they spiral into a psychotic state. David Martinez is special, however, since he has a high tolerance for cyberware, allowing him to augment himself more and more than the average human. But David's constant augmentation becomes an addiction, and even his body would have limits. The insatiable desire for self-improvement is a hallmark of Gluttony, as he can never seem to be satisfied with his current state. It's kind of like similar to Denji, except Denji's more about his desires. But, you know, point is, David's always looking for the next upgrade, the next fix to feed his ego and sense of self-worth because he has a lack of self-control. Ultimately, his overindulgence in cyberware leads to his deteriorating state, very close to cyberpsychosis. So he basically represents Gluttony because he invested too much in his cyberware upgrade in excess and beyond reason.
Here comes the money.
Here we go, money talk.
Here comes the money.
The final anime protagonist that I chose to represent one of the 7 deadly sins was actually hard to decide, since it could probably be like several different characters in different ways. And I know I said 7 in total anime protagonists, but just pretend they're like one character. It's fine. You don't need to type angrily in the comments. I don't give a shit. But anyways, first, I could say Jodio Joestar represents greed, since his primary motivation is to become extremely wealthy through unconventional means, like, you know, selling drugs to kids at his school. Or another person that can represent greed but kind of through a more conventional method than Jodio, could be Kazuma, who also loves money and wants to get it with minimal effort through his business transaction. Makoto Edamura from The Great Pretender could also represent greed, as he is a con man and believes that through conning and pulling off big elaborate schemes, that will be the only way he could make some good money. These characters each bring a unique perspective to the theme of greed, showcasing its various forms and consequences. Whether it's through unethical schemes, lazy get-rich-quick ideas, or elaborate cons, Jodio, Makoto, and Kazuma, all of these guys, what they want the most is that sweet bread. There you have it. 7 Deadly Sins as anime protagonists. Peace.